When we think about Jamestown, we usually get this picture of heroism, right? The beginning of America. But what if I told you that's not even half the story? The real story is so much darker, way more complex, and honestly, it tells us a truth about this country that we're still grappling with today. So, if you really want to get what happened at Jamestown, you have to start with just one number, a really devastating number: 90%. Just let that sink in. 90%. That was the death rate for some of the Native American communities in the area. And this was before the colony even really got going. Seriously, this one number, it's the key that unlocks the entire story. You see, the first huge tragedy of the Jamestown story, it happened almost in secret. Most of the English colonists, they had no idea what they were even seeing. It was like an apocalypse, but one delivered by a completely invisible enemy. And that invisible weapon, it was biological. The Europeans brought over germs, things like smallpox, typhus, that were totally new to the Americas. The people here had never encountered them before, so they had zero natural immunity. This is what scientists call a virgin soil epidemic. And for the folks living there, it was an absolutely unstoppable nightmare. And this wasn't just a one-time thing, oh no. It came in waves. It's likely the powerful Powhatan Confederacy was already reeling from diseases brought by earlier explorers, even before Jamestown was a thing. But then, between 1617 and 1619, a massive smallpox pandemic just ripped through the region. It was the final, crippling blow. And guess what? It happened right as a whole new flood of English settlers was on its way. It's so important to understand this was way more than just a death toll. We're talking about a complete societal collapse. I mean, imagine losing all your elders, your leaders, all that cultural knowledge, just gone. Their traditional medicine stopped working, which led to a massive spiritual crisis, and with no one left to farm the land, famine followed. The entire fabric of their world was just unraveling. And the English colonists, how did they see all this? Well, their perspective is pretty chilling. They didn't see a human tragedy. Not at all. They saw it as an act of God. The hand of God, they called it, literally clearing the land for them. It was all the justification they needed, proof that their mission was blessed from above. Okay, so let's pivot now, because at the exact same time one world was collapsing outside the fort walls, a completely different but just as horrifying catastrophe was playing out inside for the colonists themselves. You know the saying, location, location, location? Well, the colonists failed that test spectacularly. They built Jamestown right in what scientists now call a fresh salt transition zone. It's basically an ecological death trap. The river water just sits there. It doesn't flow out to sea, so all their own waste and filth just festers. It turned the whole area into a perfect petri dish for disease. And the gap between what they expected and what they got, it was just brutal. They were sold this dream of a paradise, pearls, gold, easy living. What they actually found was a disgusting swamp. The water they were drinking, the very thing they needed to live, was poisoning them with typhoid, dysentery, and even salt. Their new world was literally killing them from day one. So all of this, it reached a terrifying peak during the winter of 1609 to 1610. This period is so infamous in American history that it just has one name: the Starving Time. The guy in charge at the time called it a lecture of misery, and frankly, that might be an understatement. And again, the numbers, they're just staggering. About 240 colonists went into that winter. By the time spring rolled around, only 60 were still alive. Think about that. 3 out of every 4 people gone in just a few months. So what did they do to survive? They ate anything and everything. First, the horses went. Then the dogs and cats. Then rats and mice. When all the animals were gone, they started boiling their leather boots just to have something to chew on. And when even that wasn't enough, things got truly, truly dark. We have a first-hand account from George Percy, the colony's president, and it's just horrific. He wrote about a man who murdered his own pregnant wife, cut her up, salted her, and ate her to survive. This is the absolute rock bottom of human desperation. We're talking about survival cannibalism. And look, for hundreds of years, people thought maybe these stories were just wild exaggerations, propaganda maybe. But then in 2012, science stepped in. Archaeologists found the skull of a 14-year-old girl they named Jane, and the forensic evidence was undeniable. Chop marks, cuts, all consistent with butchery for food. The stories were absolutely true.
So, what we have here are two massive, horrifying tragedies happening side by side. But the key thing to understand is that they weren't separate events. Not at all. They were deeply and weirdly connected. Each one was actually shaping the outcome of the other.
And this right here, this is the central paradox of the whole Jamestown story. You've got the English at their absolute weakest point, starving, sick, dying. The Powhatan could have, and probably should have, wiped them off the map. But they couldn't. Why? Because they were also being devastated by their own catastrophe, the epidemics. They just didn't have the strength to deliver that final blow. From the English perspective, what they saw was an empty world. They'd find fields that were already cleared for farming, villages that were just empty. And they thought, great, this land is vacant, it's ours for the taking. They had absolutely no concept that they weren't settling a wilderness, they were settling in a cemetery. So where does that leave us? What kind of legacy comes from a colony that wasn't really born in victory, but was instead forged in the fires of two different catastrophes? Well, as you're about to see, the consequences literally shaped the America we know today. You can really see how the consequences just ripple out from here. For the native peoples, it was a total demographic and political collapse. For the English, this very same tragedy created the myth of an empty land that they could just expand into. But look at that last row about labor. The elimination of the native workforce, that right there is maybe the most profound consequence of all. Because think about it, that population collapse created a huge labor vacuum. The English had found their cash crop, tobacco, but it takes a ton of work to grow. They needed workers, and the local native population had been wiped out. So where did they turn? They turned to a new system of forced labor, and this became a major, major driver in the creation of race-based hereditary slavery in America. And all of this brings us to what you could call the Jamestown paradox. It's the really uncomfortable but really important truth at the very heart of this entire story. The survival of Jamestown wasn't about heroism or manifest destiny, not really. It survives because of this terrible twist of fate. It was a settlement built quite literally on the ashes of one society's collapse, and at the same time, it was hardened into steel by its own horrifying, desperate struggle to simply not die. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. How does our national story change when we stop seeing the beginning as a simple story of triumph? When we see it for what it was, a messy, tragic, and deeply complicated paradox born from the collision of two unimaginable catastrophes?